Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, in Book 2, Chapter 5. More than once the two had held long conversations, and from Karaher's own lips Presley heard the terrible story of the death of his wife, who had been accidentally killed by Pinkertons during a demonstration of strikers. It invested the saloon keeper in Presley's imagination with all the dignity of the tragedy. He could not blame Karaher for being a Red. He even wondered how it was the saloon keeper had not put his theories into practice and adjusted his ancient wrong of his 6 inches of plug gas pipe. Presley began to conceive of the man as a character. "You wait, Mr. Presley," the saloon keeper had once said when Presley had protested against his radical ideas. "You don't know the railroad yet. Watch it and its doings long enough, and you'll come over to my way of thinking, too." It was about 7:30 when Presley reached Bonneville. The business part of the town was as yet hardly astir. He dispatched his manuscript and then hurried to the office of the Mercury. Genslinger, as he feared, had not yet put in appearance, but the janitor of the building gave Presley the address of the editor's residence, and it was there he found him in the act of sitting down to breakfast. Presley was hardly courteous to the little man and abruptly refused his offer of a drink. He delivered Magnus's envelope to him and departed. It had occurred to him that it would not do to present himself at Quien-Sabe on Hilma's birthday empty-handed, and on leaving Genslinger's house he turned his pony's head toward the business part of the town, again pulling up in front of the jeweler's, just as the clerk was taking down the shutters. At the jeweler's he purchased a little brooch for Hilma, and at the cigar stand in the lobby of the Yosemite House a box of superfine cigars, which, when it was too late, he realized that the master of Quien-Sabe would never smoke, holding, as he did, with defiant inconsistency, to miserable weeds, black, bitter, and flagrantly doctored, which he bought 3 for a nickel at Guadalajara. Presley arrived at Quien-Sabe nearly half an hour behind the appointed time, but as he had expected, the party were in no way ready to start. The carryall, its horses covered with white flynets, stood under a tree near the house, young Vaca dozing on the seat. Hilma and Sidney, the latter exuberant with a gaiety that all but brought the tears to Presley's eyes, were making sandwiches on the back porch. Mrs. Dyke was nowhere to be seen, and Annixter was shaving himself in his bedroom. This latter put a half-lathered face out of the window as Presley cantered through the gate and waved his razor with a beckoning motion. "Come on in, Press," he cried. "Nobody's ready yet. You're hours ahead of time." Presley came into the bedroom, his huge spur clinking on the straw matting. Annixter was without coat, vest, or collar. His blue silk suspenders hung in loops over either hip. His hair was disordered, the crown locks stiffer than before. "Glad to see you, old boy," he announced as Presley came in. No, don't shake hands. I'm all lather. Here, find a chair, will you? I won't be long." "I thought you said 10 o'clock, observed Presley, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Well, I did, but then again, in a way you didn't, eh?" his friend interrupted. Annixter grunted good-humoredly and turned to strop his razor. Presley looked with suspicious disfavor at his suspenders. Why is it, he observed, that as soon as a man is about to get married, he buys himself pale blue suspenders, silk ones? Now think of it. You, Buck Annixter, with sky blue silk suspenders. It ought to be a strap and a nail. Old fool, observed Annixter, whose repartee was the heaving of a brick bat's. Say, he continued, holding the razor from his face and jerking his head over his shoulder while he looked at Presley's reflection in his mirror. Say, look around. Isn't this a nifty little room? We refitted the whole house, you know. Notice she's all painted? I have been looking around, answered Presley, sweeping the room with a series of glances. He forbore criticism. Annixter was so boyishly proud of the effect that it would have been unkind to have undeceived him. Presley looked at the marvelous department store bed of brass with its brave gay canopy, the mill-made washstand with its pitcher and bowl of blinding red and green china, the straw-framed lithographs of symbolic female figures against the multicolored new wallpaper, the inadequate spindle chairs of white and gold, the sphere of tissue paper hanging from the gas fixture, and the plumes of pampas grass tucked to the wall at artistic angles and overhanging two astonishing oil paintings in dazzling golden frames. Say, how about those paintings, Press? Inquired Annixter a little uneasily. I don't know whether they're good or not. They were painted by a three-fingered Chinaman in Monterey, and I got the lot for $30, frames thrown in. Why, I think the frames alone are worth $30. Well, so do I, declared Presley. He hastened to change the subject. Buck, he said, I hear you brought Mrs. Dyke and Sidney to live with you. You know, I think that's rather white of you. Oh, rot, Press, muttered Annixter, turning abruptly to his shaving. And you can't fool me either, old man, Presley continued. You're giving this picnic as much for Mrs. Dyke and the little tad as you are for your wife, just to cheer them up a bit. Oh, pshaw, you make me sick. Well, that's a right thing to do, Buck, and I'm as glad for your sake as I am for theirs. There was a time when you would have let them all go to grass, and never so much as thought of them. I don't want to seem to be officious, but you've changed, for the better, old man, and I guess I know why. Presley caught his friend's eye and added gravely, she's a good woman, Buck. Annixter turned around abruptly, his face flushing under its lather. Press, he exclaimed, she's made 'em enemy. I was a machine before, and if another man or woman or child got in my way, I wrote 'em down, and I never dreamed of anybody else but myself. But as soon as I woke up to the fact that I really loved her, why, it was a glory hallelujah all in a minute. And in a way, I kind of loved everybody then and wanted to be everybody's friend. And I began to see that a fellow can't live for himself any more than he can live by himself. He's got to think of others. If he's got brains, he's got to think of the poor ducks that haven't 'em, and not give 'em a boot in the backsides because they happen to be stupid. And if he's got money, he's got to help those that are busted. And if he's got a house, he's got to think of those that ain't got anywhere to go. I've got a whole lot of ideas since I began to love Hilma, and just as soon as I can, I'm going to get in and help people. And I'm going to keep to that idea the rest of my natural life. That ain't much of a religion, but it's the best I've got, and Henry Ward Beecher couldn't do any more than that. And it's all come about because of Hilma, because we cared for each other. Presley jumped up and caught Annixter about the shoulders with one arm, gripping his hand hard. This absurd figure, with dangling silk suspenders, lathered chin, and tearful eyes, seemed to be suddenly invested with true nobility. Beside this blundering struggle to do right, to help his fellows, Presley's own vague schemes, glittering systems of reconstruction collapsed to ruin, and he himself, with all his refinement, with all his poetry, culture, and education, stood, a bungler, at the world's workbench. "You're all right, old man," he exclaimed, unable to think of anything adequate. "You're all right. That's a way to talk. And here, by the way, I brought you a box of cigars." Annixter stared as Presley laid the box on the edge of the washstand. "Old fool," he remarked. "What in hell did you do that for?" "Oh, just for fun." "I suppose they're rotten stinkadoras, or you wouldn't give 'em away." This cringing gratitude, Presley began. "Shut up," shouted Annixter, and the incident was closed. Annixter resumed his shaving, and Presley lit a cigarette. "Any news from Washington?" he queried. "Nothing that's any good," grunted Annixter. "Hello," he added, raising his head. "There's somebody in a hurry for sure." The noise of a horse galloping so fast that the hoofbeats sounded in one uninterrupted rattle abruptly made itself heard. The noise was coming from the direction of the road that led from the mission to Keen's Abbey. With incredible swiftness, the hoofbeats drew nearer. There was that in their sound which brought Presley to his feet. Annixter threw open the window. "Run away!" exclaimed Presley. Annixter, with thoughts of the railroad and the jumping of the ranch, flung his hand to his hip pocket. "What is it, Vaca?" he cried. Young Vaca, turning in his seat in the carryall, was looking up the road. All at once he jumped from his place and dashed towards the window. "Dyke!" he shouted. "Dyke! It's Dyke!" While the words were yet in his mouth, the sound of the hoofbeats rose to a roar, and a great bell-toned voice shouted, "Annixter! Annixter! Annixter!" It was Dyke's voice, and the next instant he shot into view in the open square in front of the house. "Oh, my God!" cried Presley. The ex-engineer threw the horse on its haunches, springing from the saddle, and as he did so the beast collapsed, shuddering to the ground. Annixter sprang from the window and ran forward, Presley following. There was Dyke, hatless, his pistol in his hand, a gaunt, terrible figure, the beard immeasurably long, the cheeks fallen in, the eyes sunken. His clothes, ripped and torn by weeks of flight and hiding in the chaparral, were ragged beyond words. The boots were shreds of leather, bloody to the ankle with furious spurring. "Annixter!" he shouted, and again, rolling his sunken eyes. "Annixter! Annixter!" "Here, here!" cried Annixter. The other turned, leveling his pistol. Give me a horse, quick, do you hear? Give me a horse or I'll shoot." "Steady, steady, that won't do. You know me, Dyke. We're friends here." The other lowered his weapon. I know, he panted. "I'd forgotten. I'm unstrung, Mr. Annixter, and I'm running for my life. They're not 10 minutes behind me." Come on, shouted Annixter, dashing stablewards, his suspenders flying. "Here's a horse." "Mine?" exclaimed Presley. "He wouldn't carry you a mile." Annixter was already far ahead, trumpeting orders. "The buckskin," he yelled. "Get her out, Billy. Where's the stableman? Get out that buckskin. Get out that saddle." Then, following minutes of furious haste, Presley, Annixter, Billy the stableman, and Dyke himself darting hither and thither about the yellow mare, buckling, strapping, cinching, their lips pale, their fingers trembling with excitement. "Want anything to eat?" Annixter's head was under the saddle flap as he tore at the cinch. "Want anything to eat? Want any money? Want a gun?" "Water," returned Dyke. "They've watched every spring. I'm killed with thirst. There's the hydrant. Quick now." "I've got as far as the Kern River, but they turned me back," he said between breaths as he drank. "Don't stop to talk. My mother and the little Tad." I'm taking care of them. They're stopping with me. Here, you won't see him, by the Lord you won't. You'll get away. Where's that backcinch strap, Billy? Damn it, are you going to let him be shot before he can get away? Now, Dyke, up you go. She'll kill herself running before they can catch you. God bless you, Annixter. Where's the little tad? Is she well, Annixter? And the mother? Tell them, yes, he has all clear, Press. Let her have her own gait, Dyke. You're on the best horse in the county now. Let her go her head, Billy. Now, Dyke, shake hands. You bet I will. That's all right. Yes, God bless you. Let her go. You're off. Answering the goad of the spur and already quivering with the excitement of the men who surrounded her, the buckskin cleared the stable corral in 2 leaps, and gathering her legs under her, her head low, her neck stretched out, swung into the road from out the driveway, disappearing in a blur of dust. With the agility of a monkey, young Vaca swung himself into the framework of the artesian well, clambering aloft to its very top. He swept the country with a glance. Well? Demanded Annixter from the ground. The others cocked their heads to listen. I see him, shouted Vaca. He's going like the devil. He's headed for Guadalajara. Look back, up the road, toward the mission. Anything there? The answer came down in a shout of apprehension. There's a party of men, 3 or 4 on horseback, and there's dogs with them. They're coming this way. Oh, I can hear the dogs. And say, there's another party coming down the lower road, going towards Guadalajara too, and they got guns. I can see the shine of the barrels. And, oh, Lord, say, there's 3 more men on horses coming down the jump from the hills on the Los Muertos stock range. They're making towards Guadalajara, and I can hear the courthouse bell in Bonneville ringing. Say, the whole county is up. As young Vaca slid down to the ground, 2 small black and tan hounds, with flapping ears and lolling tongues, loped into view on the road in front of the house. They were gray with dust. Their noses were to the ground. At the gate where Dyke had turned into the ranch house grounds, they halted in confusion a moment. One started to follow the highwayman's trail toward the stable corral, but the other, quartering over the road with lightning swiftness, suddenly picked up the new scent leading on towards Guadalajara. He tossed his head in the air and presently, abruptly, shut his hands over his ears. Oh, that terrible cry, deep-toned, reverberating like the bourdon of a great bell. It was the trackers exulting on the trail of the pursued, the prolonged, raucous howl, eager, ominous, vibrating with the alarm of the dachshund, sullen with the heavy muffling note of death. But close upon the bay of the hounds came the gallop of horses, 5 men, their eyes upon the hounds, their rifles across their pommels, their horses reeking and black with sweat, swept by in a storm of dust, glinting hoofs, and streaming manes. That was Delaney's gang, exclaimed Annixter. I saw him. The other was a chap Christian, said Vaca, S. Behrman's cousin. He had 2 deputies with him, and the chap in the white slouch hat was the sheriff from Visalia. By the Lord, they aren't far behind, declared Annixter. As the men turned towards the house again, they saw Hilma and Mrs. Dyke in the doorway of the little house where the latter lived. They were looking out, bewildered, ignorant of what had happened. But on the porch of the ranch house itself, alone, forgotten in the excitement, Sidney, the little tad, stood with pale face and serious, wide-open eyes. She had seen everything and had understood. She said nothing. Her head inclined towards the roadway, she listened to the faint and distant baying of dogs. Dyke thundered across the railway tracks by the depot at Guadalajara, not 5 minutes ahead of his pursuers. Luck seemed to have deserted him. The station, usually so quiet, was now occupied by the crew of a freight train that lay on the down track, while on the up line near at hand and headed in the same direction was a detached locomotive whose engineer and fireman recognized him, he was sure, as the buckskin leaped across the rails. He had had no time to formulate a plan since that morning when, tortured with thirst, he had ventured near the spring at the headwaters of Broderson Creek on Quien Bay and had all but fallen into the hands of the posse that had been watching for that very move. It was useless now to regret that he had tried to foil pursuit by turning back on his tracks to regain the mountains east of Bonneville. Now Delaney was almost on him. To distance that posse was the only thing to be thought of now. It was no longer a question of hiding till pursuit should flag. They had driven him out of the shelter of the mountains down into this populous countryside, where an enemy might be met with at every turn of the road. Now it was life or death. He would either escape or be killed. He knew very well that he would never allow himself to be taken alive, but he had no mind to be killed, to turn and fight, till escape was blocked. His one thought was to leave pursuit behind. Weeks of flight had sharpened Dyke's every sense. As he turned into the upper road beyond Guadalajara, he saw the three men galloping down from Derek's stock range, making for the road ahead of him. They would cut him off there. He swung the buckskin about. He must take the lower road across Los Muertos from Guadalajara, and he must reach it before Delaney's dogs and posse. Back he galloped, the buckskin measuring her length with every leap. Once more the station came in sight. Rising in his stirrups, he looked across the fields in the direction of the lower road. There was a cloud of dust there. From a wagon? No, horses on the run, and the riders were armed. He could catch the flash of gun barrels. They were all closing in on him, converging on Guadalajara by every available road. The upper road west of Guadalajara led straight to Bonneville. That way was impossible. Was he in a trap? Had the time for fighting come at last? But as Dyke neared the depot at Guadalajara, his eye fell upon the detached locomotive that lay quietly steaming on the up line, and with a thrill of exultation, he remembered that he was an engineer born and bred. Delaney's dogs were already to be heard, and the roll of hoofs on the lower road was dinning in his ears as he leaped from the buckskin before the depot. The train crew scattered like frightened sheep before him, but Dyke ignored them. His pistol was in his hand as once more on foot he sprang toward the lone engine. "Out of the cab!" he shouted. "Both of you! Quick or I'll kill you both!" The two men tumbled from the iron apron of the tender as Dyke swung himself up, dropping his pistol on the floor of the cab and reaching with the old instinct for the familiar levers. The great compound hissed and trembled as the steam was released, and the huge driver stirred, slowly turning on the tracks. But there was a shout. Delaney's posse, dogs and men, swung into view at the turn of the road, their figures leaning over as they took the curve at full speed. Dyke threw everything wide open and caught up his revolver. From behind came the challenge of a Winchester. The party on the lower road were even closer than Delaney. They had seen his maneuver, and the first shot of the fight shivered the cab windows above the engineer's head. But spinning futilely at first, the drivers of the engine at last caught the rails. The engine moved, advanced, traveled past the depot and the freight train, and gathering speed rolled out onto the track beyond. Smoke, black and boiling, shot skyward from the stack. Not a joint that did not shudder with the mighty strain of the steam. But the great iron brute, one of Baldwin's newest and best, came to call, obedient and docile as soon as ever the great pulsing heart of it felt a master hand upon its levers. It gathered its speed, bracing its steel muscles, its thews of iron, and roared out upon the open track, filling the air with the rasp of its tempest breath, blotting the sunshine with the belch of its hot, thick smoke. Already it was lessening in the distance when Delaney, Christian, and the sheriff of Visalia dashed up to the station. The posse had seen everything. "Stuck! Curse the luck!" vociferated the cowpuncher. But the sheriff was already out of the saddle and into the telegraph office. "There's a derailing switch between here and Bixley, isn't there?" he cried. "Yes. Wire ahead to open it. We'll derail him there. Come on." He turned to Delaney and the others. They sprang into the cab of the locomotive that was attached to the freight train. "Name of the state of California," shouted the sheriff to the bewildered engineer. "Cut off from your train." The sheriff was a man to be obeyed without hesitating. Time was not allowed the crew of the freight train for debating as to the right or the wrong of requisitioning the engine, and before anyone thought of the safety or danger of the affair, the freight engine was already flying out upon the down line, hot in pursuit of Dyke, now far ahead upon the track. "I remember perfectly well there's a derailing switch between here and Bixley," shouted the sheriff above the roar of the locomotive. "They use it in case they have to derail runaway engines. It runs right off into the country. We'll pile 'em up there. Ready with your guns, boys." If we should meet another train coming up on this track," protested the frightened engineer, "well, then we jump or be smashed. Hi, look, there he is." As the freight engine rounded a curve, Dyke's engine came into view, shooting on some quarter of a mile ahead of them, wreathed in whirling smoke. "The switch ain't much further on," clamored the engineer. "You can see Pixley now." Dyke, his hand on the grip of the valve that controlled the steam, his head out of the cab window, thundered on. He was back in his old place again. Once more he was the engineer. Once more he felt the engine quiver under him. The familiar noises were in his ears. The familiar buffeting of the wind surged, roaring at his face. The familiar odors of hot steam and smoke reeked in his nostrils, and on either side of him, parallel panoramas, the two halves of the landscape sliced, as it were, in two by the clashing wheels of his engine, streamed by in green and brown blurs. He found himself settling to the old position on the cab seat, leaning on his elbow from the window, one hand on the controller. All at once the instinct of the pursuit that of late had become so strong within him prompted him to shoot a glance behind. He saw the other engine on the down line, plunging after him, rocking from side to side with the fury of its gallop. Not yet had he shaken the trackers from his heels. Not yet was he out of the reach of danger. He set his teeth, and throwing open the fire door, stoked vigorously for a few moments. The indicator of the steam gauge rose. His speed increased. A glance at the telegraph poles told him he was doing his 50 miles an hour. The freight train behind him was never built for that pace. Barring the terrible risk of accident, his chances were good. But suddenly, the engineer dominating the highwayman, he shut off his steam and threw back his brake to the extreme notch. Directly ahead of him rose a semaphore placed at a point where evidently a derailing switch branched from the line. The semaphore's arm was dropped over the track, setting the danger signal that showed the switch was open. In an instant, Ike saw the trick. They had meant to smash him here, had been clever enough, quick-witted enough to open the switch, but had forgotten the automatic semaphore that works simultaneously with the movement of the rails. To go forward was certain destruction. Dyke reversed. There was nothing for it but to go back. With a wrench and a spasm of all its metal fibers, the great compound braced itself, sliding with rigid wheels along the rails. Then, as Dyke applied the reverse, it drew back from the great danger, returning towards the less. Inevitably now, the two engines, one on the up, the other on the down line, must meet and pass each other. Dyke released the levers, reaching for his revolver. The engineer once more became highwayman in peril of his life. Now, beyond all doubt, the time for fighting was at hand. The party in the heavy freight engine that lumbered after in pursuit, their eyes fixed on the smudge of smoke on ahead that marked the path of the fugitive, suddenly raised a shout. "He's stopped! He's broke down! Watch now and see if he jumps off." "Broke nothing! He's coming back! Ready now! He's got to pass us!" The engineer applied the brakes, but the heavy freight locomotive, far less mobile than Dyke's flyer, was slow to obey. The smudge on the rails ahead grew swifter, larger. "He's coming! He's coming! Look out! There's a shot! He's shooting already!" A bright white sliver of wood leaped into the air from the sooty windowsill of the cab. "Fire on him! Fire on him!" While the engines were yet 200 yards apart, the duel began. Shot answering shot, the sharp staccato reports punctuating the thunder of wheels and the clamor of steam. Then the ground trembled and rocked. A roar as of heavy ordnance developed with the abruptness of an explosion. The two engines passed each other, the men firing the while, emptying their revolvers, shattering wood, shivering glass, the bullets clanging against the metalwork as they struck and struck and struck.